This is an interview with Morris McClellan, longtime Subud member who's had many jobs in Subud. Morris, can you start by telling us how you found and came into Subud?
I think it was about 19. I was really taken with Meher Baba. He was the guy who did "Don't Worry, Be Happy" was his, anyway. Um, as a preamble, I should say that I was brought up in a family that was Unitarian Universalist. And for those who don't know much about Unitarian Universalists, we tend to celebrate every other religion's holidays. Um, it's being brought up in the religious education program of the Unitarian Universalists. You wind up getting a picture of world religion. You don't just learn about your own religion, you learn about everybody else's religions. And the challenge is not how will you continue to be a Unitarian Universalist, but at some point you need to make a choice in your life as to a spiritual path for you, whether it's being a UU or something else. Everything's on the table. Everything's acceptable. It's maybe why UUs don't grow so fast as a congregation, because they challenge their children to consider other choices. At any rate, uh, by the time I was in my late teens, I'd sort of established. I was also into yoga and Eastern. I did a lot of reading in Eastern philosophies. And I decided that there were four things that would identify a credible, authentic religious, spiritual path. Not religious, but spiritual path. One was no human interpreter between you and your spiritual experience. I have a problem with priesthood, is what that means. And the other one was that there was no religion above another. No religion could be considered to be better or more in God's favor than any other religion that the crazy human beings came up with. Then it had to be no proselytizing. I always felt that if you had to sell it, it probably needed selling. It, it wasn't as good as it might have been without the sales job. Um, and finally, it was that it was operative, it was functional, it was available to you wherever you were, not related to any geological place like, say, Mount Shasta, or it had to go with you where you were. My vision of spirituality had positioned the connection within, not without. And so, from this, having arrived at this perspective, when I found Subud, I just sort of fell over for it, because I didn't expect to find anything that had those four things that I considered to be hallmarks of authentic spirituality, a path of authentic spirituality-ness. um, but I did in Subud. And so intellectually, I was sort of prepared to go, well, this is it. I like this. Let's do this. But when it actually happened was I was a friend of mine from high school, Daniel Foster, another longtime Subud member. He and I went to the same high school. And in my late teens, I'd gone to LA, and now I drove back across the United States in my 1957 psychedelic Volvo, and wound up staying with Daniel in his apartment in Cambridge for a while. And at the same time, I was a singer-songwriter, and I was on the make, trying to, develop a career as a singer-songwriter. And Daniel's also a singer and a songwriter and a player. And so a bandmates of some friends of his from Vermont came down to stay with him at the apartment where I was also staying. And it was a band called The Joyful Noise. And it was all Subud people. Um, the oh Geez, I've forgotten their names. That's a shame. Um, you'd recognize the name. Do you know the band I'm talking about, Rahman?
I'm not sure if I do or not.
Um,
Name sounds.
how the brothers? There were two brothers that were in it. One played bass. The
Well,
other.
Lucas, was it Lucas
That's
Rowe?
it. The Rose. Yes, the Rose and a couple of other guys. David Hanai. Um, and it was a pretty good band. They actually had a record out on RCA. And they happened to be playing at the same club that I was hosting the Hoot Nanny, what we used to call open mics. Uh, Hosted the Hoot Nanny there, and so um, I was sort of inundated into Subud community. And Daniel had given me a book concerning Subud by Bennett, C.G. Bennett, which I kind of devoured. I inhaled that book. And I was kind of ready. But right at that moment, I was kind of pulled out of Boston because I had to go to LA in order to report for my alternative service as a conscientious objector. It was the Vietnam War. And so I did that, and I went home. I found a job that would be okay for my alternative service, and I was all situated. I got a job at Children's Hospital in LA, and I was hitching down the street with my guitar, and I got picked up by a microbus. And driving that microbus was Victor Wamet. Also in that bus was Hanafi Libman, and some other people. But there was plenty of room, and so being an outgoing child, I said, would you like to hear a song? Because I'm going down to participate in an open mic down Hollywood Boulevard at a club. They said, sure. So I said, okay, fine. I pulled out my guitar and I said, here's a song I learned from the Joyful Noise in Subud. And I sang, you can read it in the morning papers, hear it on the radio, how crime is a-sweeping our nation. This world is about to go. We need a good old case of salvation to put the love of God in our souls. We need a whole lot more Jesus and a lot less rock and roll. And so I sang that for them, and they said, oh, the Joyful Noise, they're in Subud. As a longtime member of Subud yourself, you know that it's highly unlikely to find out that somebody's in Subud just by getting picked up on a hitchhiking thing. You could work next to somebody for 30 years and not know they're in Subud because we don't talk about it that much. And so, I thought it was I came to see it as a minor miracle that I was picked up by this particular bus. And I said, oh, you're in Subud. Great. Where's the hall? Where can I go do my probationing? Because they were surprised to find out that I knew something about Subud. And at that point, I just, twice a week, I took a bus down to Hope Street Hall and I did my probationing. It's 3 months just as prescribed. And I got opened there in Hope Street Hall. And that's kind of how I got launched into this practice of offering yourself over to your inner source.
What year was that?
69. I got opened in 69. Yeah. So, and at this point, there's a couple of things I can say along the way. One was that I struggled with the idea of surrender. Giving myself over initially felt sketchy. I wasn't convinced. I wasn't so sure. But after maybe a couple of years of doing the exercise, I began to understand that Holy Source doesn't want us for anything in particular different from what we're doing. Holy Source wants to just have us evolve into the best example of ourselves we can be. And so surrendering means I'm going to let my true cat out of the bag and throw myself over onto the loving source of life and receive whatever I receive with that place of, what is it, um, faith, patience, sincerity, and surrender. You know, the typical, when I got into Subud, those four words kind of were given to me as a hallmark, or not a hallmark, but more of a descriptor of how to think about the exercise, that faith, patience, surrender, and sincerity. And over the years, I've added two words of my own. One is trust, absolute trust. That's the new one. Maybe I just added one word. I don't know. It's okay. We're grading on a curve here, so we're good. Um, so that, and then, you know, it is about a year later, I got married with Liana, and that life took over. Now, at this point, I'm thinking of things that occurred to me that were reflective of the activity of the Latihan in my life. Right? Is that an area of exploration here?
Sure. Yeah.
Um, there's this thing we do in Subud called testing, where we ask a question and then offer up that question for receiving and receive an answer from that source within our exercise. It's an art. It's not a science, and it. I did early on. I did a lot. I did a certain amount of testing with helpers who had been in Subud for some time, but I never felt like I received well myself, clearly by myself, when I would test. And so this little story is about how I learned to trust my testing. And it in 79, so that's like 10 years after I got opened, 1979, there was a Congress going on, a World Congress in Toronto. And Liana and I had been able to purchase, prepay everything, and we were all ready to go. But then Liana, thankfully, she got pregnant with Marisa, our first daughter. And she backed out of the Congress and decided not to go because she didn't want to go with a brand new newborn. And that made sense. And so now I was left with the decision as to whether or not myself to go and leave Liana, or should I back out and get the refund? Because there was we'd put down a lot of money. It was in the thousands to, travel and stay in Toronto for 2 weeks. And the deadline was right upon us. And either I was going to cancel and get the money back, because we had just bought a house. I didn't have a job. It was not, we were not on a firm financial foundation at this point, and that $2,000 I would get as the refund smelled good, So I thought, well, shit, I've got about a day to decide. I'm just going to try this testing thing one more time and just see if I get anything useful. And so I decided I would give it the full college try. And so I did a full half-hour Latihan before I did any testing. And I posed the question before that Latihan, what's the best question for me to ask to get at what I need to know in order to make a credible decision about this, to go or to not go? And so after the Latihan finished up, the only thing that was rattling around my head was, of what use will I be if I go to the Congress? Of what use will I be? I'm a Capricorn. in my reading of things, I've always wanted to be involved. I've never really thrived at being a spectator. And it made sense to me that I would ask that question because I would want to be of service and of use if I was going to go. I didn't want to go and just watch or, play off in a corner. So, long story short, I tested the question of what use will I be if I go to the Congress. And I received a receiving that lasted maybe 20, 25 seconds, where I would walk up to something which felt like a microphone. I would walk up to a microphone, I would say things, and then I would back up and let somebody else on, and then I, from that angle, would applaud them. And then I would do it again. I would go up and I would introduce somebody, and I would back up and let the act come on and applaud them. And, honestly, it felt at the time like I was doing the activity of being an MC. Now, every World Congress that I'd been to prior to that had been organized to a fare thee well, and that all of the jobs that might be front of people types of jobs were probably already established. But I decided I was busy. So I took that at its face value, and I decided to go to the Congress, the Toronto Congress. So I went to the Toronto Congress with one goal in mind, which was to find out where you sign up to do performance, to do, talent stuff, sign up, and then I'd expired all of the interest that I had at that point. I'd done my thing, and then I was going to wait and see what happened. So I found the place to sign up. I signed up, and I sat down. And the guy who was in charge of the whole shebang of all of the entertainment for this Congress came up, and he was like that. I don't know if you remember Little Abner, the comic strip. They had a character on there that went around with a raining cloud over their head because they're always in just a depressed mood. Well, that's what this guy was. He did not want to be in that role. I don't know why he accepted it in the first place. He was a jazz player of some kind. I think he played the horn. Well known around Toronto. A good name to have in your entertainment. But he was not on board. And that was the last time I saw him until like 10 days later when I saw him perform, and he was excellent. But I took over that job. People began to come up and sign up on the sign up sheet, and ask me questions because I was sitting there, and I would make things up, and I would go find out stuff, and I began to be sort of accepted as the hub of entertainment. And over the course of that period of time, I put on like 7 different evenings of international talent, and dealt with all of the people who shouldn't perform, and found places for them to have a performance experience that maybe wasn't in front of everybody. And I found out that my receiving was more accurate than I could possibly have imagined, because that's what I did. Another thing that I was left with from that experience was the sense that I had a 45-degree mirror in my chest that reflected things upward to source, if you want to imagine it that way. Source is all around us. It's not just above us. But for this metaphor, we're going up. And so when people would thank me or compliment me for the way the entertainment came out, because honestly, it came out great. Those were some of my best memories of Subud entertainment that I have. I mean, I could enumerate some of the things, the acts that went on then, and they were terrific. And it felt great to do it. But people would thank me or compliment me, and I would recognize that I had been given the right to be of service. It wasn't really that much about me. The fact that I was doing it meant that I'd been selected to do this job in some weird form way of selection. And so I had to pass that I would reflect those compliments upward toward source, toward God, whatever you want to call it. And that it changed the way my interpretation of the expression all praise to God, which before had meant to me like we give all of our praise, we give each of us to God. Now I see it as all the praise that we receive from others for jobs well done, that we reflect that up to source as the way that we were able to be of such good service was to be in surrender and carry the spirit of service in how we behaved. So that's how I learned to trust my testing. Ever since then, I've trusted my testing perfectly well. So the next thing I think in my Subud life that was remarkable was creating the business that we did. I had two business partners, Lewis Ross and his wife, someone who became his wife, now named Yasmina. She was Eleanor then. But Lewis is a fabulous guitar player, much better than me. I'm not bad, but Lewis is gifted and brilliant, and had a background of classical music. I had built a recording studio in my basement because, remember, I was a singer-songwriter. I was trying to make a living. I was trying to develop a living in the music business in Los Angeles. And Lewis asked me if maybe we could do a project together. And I said, let's play some Christmas music. I had heard a little 3-song tape that Lewis had done with a bass player for a Jakob Ander, actually, for a radio station in Chicago, and it was just lovely. And I thought I always thought to myself, wow, a whole album of that would really be great. In the early 80s, this was in the early 80s, and yeah, 82, 80, 81, 82. There wasn't a lot of really good Christmas instrumental music. It was all Tabernacle Choir and Bing Crosby and the Chipmunks, and not a lot of Christmas music that was really worth having on while you're having dinner, a Christmas dinner. So we talked about it, and we started recording this little album where he would multi-track treatments of common Christmas carols on a little handful of guitars, so that he'd play more than one instrument, and he would orchestrate it so that there were multiple tracks going on, and they're all the common Christmas carols. So we finished this up. It took us about a year. We got it out in the late fall of 82. And I had been a magazine distributor. I was in and out of bookstores and magazine stands and stuff, anywhere you'd sell magazines. And so I had a whole bunch of customers who had grown to trust me, because that's what happens when somebody works with me. They come to trust me. And I said, I got this Christmas record. How about you play it in your store and see if anybody wants to buy it? And that's a preposterous ask to make of somebody if you don't know them. And so I had probably about 10 different ones of my customers say yes to this. And so we found out that people really did go for this album. It's called A Collection of Favorite Christmas Carols by the New American Guitar Ensemble. I have one. Check it out.
It's an LP.
Yeah, this is a first edition because the back is poorly done. I didn't have enough time to do the back right. I did the back right the next season. Christmas is always coming. That was a wonderful thing about selling a Christmas product. but it's the New American Guitar Ensemble is what I called Lewis with, uh, oh, look, and it still has a sticker from B. Dalton Bookstore. So this was out in a store in 1982. Um, didn't sell, unfortunately, but there you go. Anyway, so this record. I think of it as a gift from God. There's almost no other way to say it. Um, because it it went up like a flare over a brand new marketplace that didn't pre-exist, which was the idea of playing music in bookstores and gift stores that they would carry for sale. And I called this marketing technique in-store play and sell marketing. Um, I had studied the history of the music business in college. My college degree is the history of country and Western music. But what it really was the study of the way the music business developed in the United States of America. And so I kind of recognized what I was doing as being a radical approach to selling music. And then over the course of the next 6 years, I developed a line of non-Christmas music, and as well as further Christmas music, and developed a large catalog of music that's appropriate for stores to play as background music, but also so nice as music that people will say, "What is that? Where can I get that?" And then my customer would sell it to them, and eventually I'd get some money too. And so this was very much a Subud enterprise. It was dripping with spirituality, the business. Because Lewis and I, every time we started to record, we would do a little Latihan before we began to record. And then halfway through, we began to wonder, are we making an album that we will sell to another label and just receive royalties on possible sales? Or are we starting a record label ourselves? And so we tested that question. And both of us very clearly received, boys, you're starting a record label. And so then, of course, now the next question becomes, what do we call it? And so we brought that question to testing as well. And I still remember it vividly, actually. Lewis received a position of service. It was like this. And we recognized that as the spirit that became our logo. Another long story I probably won't share at this point, but I pranced around the room like I was riding a horse. And I'm going around the room, and all I can hear in my brain is, the British are coming, the British are coming, the British are coming. And so Lewis and I felt that we were being suggested that a good name for our company was Revere Records. But in order to be smart about testing, we first had to eliminate the idea that it should be Paul Revere Records. And so we tested that and got, yes, lose the Paul, keep the Revere. And so we started Revere Records. Later on, I started a distribution company that, through a process of testing, also wound up with a name which was Lifedance Distribution. And so combining these two in a corporation, we became the Revere Lifedance Company Corporation, which I always got up in the morning happy to go to a place called Revere Lifedance. I always felt like a good name. A slang term for the Latihan would be the life dance. And so there you go. That's the how I later, after I trusted my testing, how I applied my testing. And the whole idea of the Subud enterprise, I'm sure other interviewees have talked about how Bapak was big on the enterprises and doing having businesses where we could employ the contact and work in this outer world from a perspective of the inner world, which was always a theme in Subud. And one of the things that I would say in my elevator speech when people would ask me about Subud. And there's a funny thing. You know, I've been in Subud 53 years. I can't point at a single person who's come into Subud because of me. I'm sad about that. But I guess I haven't been as good enough an example as I should have been. So what's next? Got any more questions?
Have you had any experiences related to BAPOC?
I have. I took to thanking BAPOC in my prayers, just for being, you know, taking the role of messenger to bring this exercise to all of our attention. And sometimes he seems more present than others. But I always feel like he's, you know, being BAPOC, just watching, you know. Now, I've had one occasion I had to meet him was it 82 or around there, 81. I was chairperson of Subud Los Angeles at that point. And BAPOC was having a visit happen along the west coast of the United States. And we had a little kerfuffle in Subud, LA over the management of the visit. I won't go into all of that, but BAPOC had set up this thing where he was sitting on the stage behind curtains of the Hope Street Hall, which later, of course, became the California Center, I think, right? And we each had a chance to walk through and shake BAPOC's hand, sort of a private moment with BAPOC, one after the other. And I never felt a tremendous amount of anxiety in meeting BAPOC or being close to him. I've always, I don't know if that's because I'm arrogant or stupid or what, you know, but I've always been accepting of my own level of achievement next to somebody else who might be eons ahead of me in terms of spiritual evolution. So I didn't freak out. But anyway, so I took my turn, I walked through and I shook BAPOC's hand and I introduced myself as the chairperson of Subud, LA. And he looked up, he was kind of distracted, but when he heard that, he looked up at me and shook my hand strongly. I felt like he had been, it had been tough being the chairperson of Subud, LA during that visit because of all the hard decisions that I had to make that influenced people's lives or had an effect on people. And I had to fire somebody who was very strong and did not want to be fired because it was not a job that was good for the community. And I didn't want to fire him, but I was the only one in the position that had to. And so I accepted my role and fulfilled my service on behalf of the larger community. And I had to go all the way up to Sharif Horthy to confirm that I had the right to do the firing. I had to line up all my ducks before I went to the guy I had to fire and say, you're not doing the job well enough for a number of reasons, so you're out of the job. And I felt like this drama had made its way back to the chief. And so that when I introduced myself as chairperson, he kind of had the backstory and wanted to take a look at who it was that was doing this. But it all came out well for BAPOC, and the visit went fine once I made the change. So, and I've always felt kind of like that was a form of a test It was one of the hardest things I did in my life so far. Who knows what tomorrow may need. Um, and that the gift of the business, the inspiration for that business, I always felt like there was a connection between my doing my job as chairperson of Subud LA for the benefit of the community, um, was in a sense rewarded with this business, or I proved that I had the mettle to handle such a business. Whatever the interpretation would be, but I always felt like there was a connection from my having done my job as well as I possibly could in difficult situations as chairperson, and then it wasn't a coincidence that then I was able to start a business that kept as many as 35 people working over the next almost 20 years. So that's how I view that.
Wow. Good story.
Yeah. Um,
So your business went for 20 something years?
yeah, I sold out in 95. It got started in 82. And Louis and Yasmina kept it alive for another 3 or 4 years. But the writing was on the writing was on the wall. The internet had arrived, and the music business would never be the same. And so I've got a noisy car outside. Shut up out there. Yeah. So that was a period of really good satisfaction for me. Even though I wasn't writing music, I was involved with music, and I was helping many performers who probably wouldn't make as good a living in the regular music business as they would in the in-store play and sell marketplace. Quite a few people had very good livings who, as musicians, probably wouldn't have done as well. So I'm very satisfied with having done that. It's a good thing. And I praise God, you know. The commitment to be of service to the best of my ability to the thing that was given to me. You know, I think I got the most out of that collection of favorite Christmas carols as anybody might have could have. So, anything else? What do we got?
How about how did you meet your wife?
So, I met Liana in San Francisco in 1970. And she came out to visit her brother, Wallace Klein, longtime Subud member. And so I had already met Wallace. And Liana had, her name was Susan at the time. She had another brother, a younger brother, who went to Harvard. And when I went on my trip back east that I described earlier, I wound up staying at a friend of mine was also at Harvard, and he snuck me into the dorm for a few nights. And he was, it turns out, friends with this Andy Klein guy who was Liana's brother. So I had met Andy Klein. I looked like Kit Carson at the time. I had long blonde hair with as much beard as I could grow for a blonde kid, and a mustache. I kind of looked, a little Western. And Andy was clean cut, crew cut like. It's like absolute freshman look. So I'm at a social gathering in San Francisco. Hell, you may even have been there. And Wallace's wife, Pamela, has this young woman by the hand and is dragging her toward me. And she says, "Morris, I have someone for you." And she presents Susan, and we kind of hit it off, and we saw each other for a little while, and then we drove down to L.A. to meet my parents, which was kind of fun. Um, and long story short, in about 6 weeks, I asked her if she wouldn't marry me, um, and she said yes. And so we've been married. We got. I mean, it's both of us do not recognize. Both of us say to our children, "Don't do that. Don't get married in 6 weeks. Don't get married in 8 weeks." It worked out for us, but we don't recommend it as a steady diet for the human family. So that's pretty much how it is. We have two great daughters who bring me great pride all the time. I'm sure you know about that, Rockman, with your kids. It's the best thing to watch what they do and still be a part of their lives. What else can I offer?
Well, you just reminded me that of your wedding at Marin church that
Right, the Tiburon.
I have a lot of pictures of your wedding.
You're a good man, Rockman. Yep. Yeah, that was, boy, those were the days.
Things have affected you in your Subud life?
What has what?
What other things have affected you in your Subud life?
Well, I have to say I have deep gratitude to have discovered this exercise when I did early. I am also glad that I stuck with it. Um, I now recognize, having done this exercise this long in all my life, that upon my departure from this body, I have no anxiety particularly. I am utterly confident that my consciousness will continue in some form. It might be joined by other consciousnesses or personalities that I have been in prior lives. I am one of those who believe in reincarnation. Not that I believe I know how it works, but that I think there is way too much evidence that each of us have had prior lives. I know I feel that. And so this has been, one of the things that I tell people about Subud is it's a long, slow process of cleansing and attunement in order to live in this world from the perspective of the other world. And it has been a long, slow process of cleansing and attunement. I do feel connected. I don't have any expectations of spirit to necessarily reach into my life and affect me in ways that I would notice that it was spirit. I don't have that expectation. I don't think it's impossible. But I don't have an expectation of it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I just count on that unshakable trust that we are each loved and appreciated and cheered on in our progress of life. So, when I pass away, I plan to pass away with, uh, lead me to my best place. I trust you. I'm ready to know what's the best, what's the highest truth I can possibly know. I allow you to show that to me. I'm ready for that. Take it. Take me. Um, in the meantime, I'll keep doing some. I'll keep singing at people, and I'll keep doing some bookkeeping. And keep following my kids. So who knows what's next? The body's been kind to me in terms of being 73 and still being able to get around and be able to work and function normally. I'm not inhibited, although I have achy places everywhere.
Yeah. Well, I'm 79, so
Yeah,
I'm
man.
2 years on you.
It's funny. Your specific age matters least in the middle of our lives than they do at the beginning and at the end. Because when you're 9 and somebody else is 13, that's a big difference. But when you're 53 and 56, that's nothing. But when you're 73 and 76, there can definitely be distinctions. Anyway, just a little tiny observation on the how life works or is.
So I don't have any more questions, but if you have anything else you'd like to add,
I'm sure I'll think of stuff later.
yeah.
I have to say, I do love the Latihan. I always felt like if I was God, this is what I would have people do. It's not a ceremony. It's an active growing. It's an and it supersedes the intellectualism of religion. Every religion, they may eschew the idea that they're intellectual, but they will have intellectual properties where they have little laws and little things that you got to do that mean that you're sincere or you're worthy and it's all such bullshit. The Latihan is, I present myself as I am. I accept your acceptance of me as I am. Let's get on with it. Take me, move me, change me, manipulate me, free me, help me to release stuff that's holding me back. It's a wonderful way to be in touch with our inner source. And man, that testing thing is such a bundle of interesting conundrums. I have tested and followed that testing and not had a good result. I have tested and followed that receiving and had excellent results. And I don't know what the difference is between what I intended to, between the following of testing that worked and the following of testing that proved to be less smart than I might have, should have, could have done. Maybe if I'd used my own head. But I used my head to make the decision to use the testing. So there, I accept, my head was involved and it said, get out of the way. So, yeah, I feel privileged to have been one of the humans to find out about this exercise and stick with it. And I'll just expound on a couple of other little theories that I'm sure some people will argue with me and say I'm a heretic, and okay, I can live with that. One of them is that I think that the Latihan is very similar to what George Fox had when he started Quakerism. They moved in the early days. It was a form of surrender. Fox was very Christian. Quakerism is very Christian. But they moved, they danced, they quaked. It's very possible that it was similar to what the Latihan is. Another example of this exercise showing up at another time other than coming in with Bapak is the Paiute Indian chief Wovoka, who started a movement called the Ghost Dance, which the not the Plains Indians, but the West Coast. Paiute was in the Carson River Valley and that area, eastern Sierras, was their territory. And this was right around the time of the Wounded Knee Massacre, because many of the people that were wounded or killed at Wounded Knee were doing the Ghost Dance. And many people who took up the Ghost Dance thought that it would make them invulnerable to soldiers' bullets, which it didn't. But Wovoka never said that. Wovoka, for him, it was a spiritual experience. This dance that that was basically a giving up of yourself to spirit. That's why they call it the Ghost Dance. Now, this is pure speculation and guesswork. I haven't done a ton of research, except I did read a lot about Wovoka because I was fascinated by the Ghost Dance and American Indians in general. It was an area of deep reading, deep study when I was younger. At any rate, I just think it's interesting to say maybe the Ghost Dance was also like the Ladihan. Maybe the Quakers had the Ladihan. But I think that Bapak was wise in keeping the genders separate. The Quakers did not do that. The exercise itself, I feel better doing it only with those of my own gender. I have no problem doing it with human beings who see themselves as male, although their body may have, call yourself male, you're welcome in my Ladihan, is my perspective. I don't care if maybe you had a sex change operation. If you're comfortable with calling yourself male, I'm comfortable with having you in the Ladihan, because you're a human being. And every human being deserves to be able to do the Ladihan. So that's, yeah, there. I'm stammering now. I must be done.
Was
But
nice.
yeah, the Ladihan's great.
Yeah.
And it's been great to know that if I go anywhere in the world, I can find a Subud group and have what would feel like, to some degree, an extended family. There's a good story. I happened to be singing with a Unitarian choir in the early 2000s when the Unitarian choir decided to go to Cuba. And we arranged to go for a week. And I arranged to stay a week longer after the choir returned and hang out with the Subud community in Cuba, because it had been isolated since the late 50s when Castro took over. And yet the community of Subud in Cuba survived. And when I went to Cuba, I brought a computer motherboard and a CPU chip, because they wanted to upgrade their computer to help them with their newsletter. But it was a big, getting it into Cuba was hilarious. I caused a problem for the entire choir, because the government pulled me out of line and said, "What do you have? What's in your bag? I see you've got a large motherboard, and it was at a time when this motherboard you could pick this thing up for probably $25 at a thrift store or a garage sale. So it was like a 12-year-old technology from our perspective. Long story short, I got it to the people. They were glad to have a computer. I borrowed money from other people in the choir, which I paid back later. And I paid the government to get this thing out of hock because they wanted this high excise tax on it. But I hung around with the Subud group in Havana for about a week after that, after the choir left, and had a great time and discovered that the Ladihan translated perfectly well. It was the Ladihan that I did having lived outside of Cuba, was the same Latihan that they were doing in Cuba. The exercise survived as itself. There were a couple of little cultural things that they did that were little add-ons, but that didn't obscure or alter the authenticity of the exercise as I perceived it, that they were doing also. That little piece of data about interesting anecdote about the Latihan surviving separated from the world culture of Subud in one country that isolated it. So there's that.
Yeah.
And what else? What else? Great fun. Oh, other than that, it's just personal experiences with Subud people over the course of the years of it. I continue to be a Unitarian Universalist. Although the Latihan is more spiritual to me than going to services, so I don't really go to services anymore. For many years, for 20 years, I sang with the choir in the church. I feel very comfortable with Unitarian Universalists because they support individual belief systems. They accept you as you are, as long as you dig the 7 principles, which is the foundation of Unitarian Universalism, which you can find online if you're interested in that. It's a great. Here I am talking about Subud and promoting another spiritual community, but But I'm a good Subud member for doing that. I mean, that's everybody to the thing that resonates most authentically for yourself. That's what you should find. Or you could just do what I do and follow, do what I tell you to do. We could do that. Do the Latihan.
Okay.
Anyway, there you go. How have I done? Is that good?
Thank you. Very good.
Glad to help.